Okay. Hello and officially welcome to the 2020 Online Manure Composting Workshop. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us today. And this workshop is a collaboration between the University of Minnesota Extension along with North Dakota State University Extension, and it's funded by the North Central Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. So originally, we planned to hold this workshop in person. We were going to get together both in Minnesota and North Dakota and do a lot of hands-on stuff and be really with hands-on practice. But then this whole pandemic situation happened. And so we decided to move it online. And so that's how we got here. And this format that we're doing is a bit unique. When we started out, we were going back and forth on how we wanted to present this this workshop, how we want to do this, because we didn't want to just take our presentations and turn them and put them online and put them in a webinar and make you sit here for 5 hours, because no one wants to sit here for 5 hours watching presentations. That's not fun. So we figured we kind of had a unique opportunity here to go out and get some video footage of the things that you would have experienced if you had been able to come to this workshop live, and do some videos. And that way you can watch those videos on your own time. It's kind of self-paced. You don't have to watch them all right away and binge watch them or anything. You can do it at your own pace. So those videos launched a week ago, August 4th. So you've had a week to look at them. And then the second phase is the live discussion, which is happening right now. Now, this discussion assumes that you've already watched the videos. I know that's not possible for everyone because I've been checking up on registration every once in a while, and registrations have still been coming in throughout the week. That's okay. Those videos are still going to be up after this, so you can still go see them after today. Okay, so here is how this is going to work. We've allotted 2 hours for this workshop. Now, I don't know if that's enough time or not enough time, but we won't go over 2 hours. If we don't need the full 2 hours, that's fine. I'm cool with cutting it short if we need to. That's just fine. And this will be recorded. So I know some that registered weren't able to be here for the live discussion. So the recording will be posted on that same website where all the video content is. And if you've lost the link or if it got lost in an email shuffle or whatever, I will be sending out an email after this, once this video is posted, with the link to that website where the recording of this can be viewed. And then after this, you will be sent an evaluation for this workshop. And that evaluation covers both the pre-recorded videos that are on the webpage and then this live discussion. And just a little plug, please do our evaluation. You know, in Extension, we always have to evaluate everything that we do, but your feedback is really important to us, especially this year with the new format. And we really do take into consideration all the things you tell us and how to make this program get better. And this how this program gets better over the years, even though it will hopefully be in person in the future. So today we've got a question and answer panel or session here with some producer panels and our expert manure composters. So these are the same 3 guys, Steve, Jay, and Kurt, that you saw in the producer videos. They were kind enough to let us come to their operations and take videos of their operations, what they're doing, and interview them. That was very nice of them. And so now they're here to answer all your burning questions. So I want to make a note. We're really trying to focus on manure composting here. So we're going to try to not talk about mortality composting or municipal composting or food scrap waste, that sort of thing, because those are kind of their own topics and they're very unique and different from manure composting alone. And we could have, you know, each could have their own workshop. So there are 2 ways to ask questions. You can either type them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask in person if you'd like. You can turn on your camera for that, that's just fine. If you're not asking a question, we ask that you remain muted once again. And otherwise, I've got kind of a list of questions that I've amassed through you guys, people who have registered, who asked them either ahead of time through the registration link or if they were emailed to me separately. So I've got a list of those too. So I guess there's really 3 ways questions are asked. But before we get into the questions, I want to do introductions. So there, you can see here our list of moderators and panelists. So we've got 4 moderators and 3 panelists, except we actually only have 3 moderators because Mary's not here. She really wanted to be here, but she, when we planned this workshop originally, Mary told us that she was pregnant, and she said that, you know, okay, we have to plan it early enough so that we, you know, that I don't have the baby early and then I can't be there. And then surprise, her daughter decided to be kind of like her mother and show up early. So she was a little extra early. She won't be here, but she really wanted to. Her daughter's name is Lucy and she's doing quite well. So we'll go through the introductions here. I'll start with myself, and then Melissa and Jeff will let you introduce yourself. We're also the people that created the videos, if you didn't realize already. I'm sure you saw Mary in the videos. And then we'll introduce our panelists after that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see our beautiful faces. Okay, so you might have gallery view or speaker view. So in the top right corner of your screen, there's a little box that'll say either speaker view or gallery view. Now, if you want us to be big and the person talking to be the one that's the largest, switch that over to speaker view. And then if you want to see everybody kind of the same size, you can have it on gallery view. I prefer gallery view because it seems like the Brady Bunch, where there's a bunch of squares all around you. Okay, so I'll introduce myself first. I'm Christise Moderman. I'm from the University of Minnesota Extension. I'm an extension educator. I deal with manure management, education, and I deal with nutrient management. So I kind of focus on the crop side of the world. I'm part of the crops team. You would expect manure educator to maybe be part of the livestock or water quality team, and I kind of have a foot in a lot of different areas. But mostly I deal with the crop side. All right, Melissa, why don't you go ahead and quick introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Melissa Wilson. I'm the state specialist for manure management at the University of Minnesota. So unlike Christine said, I have an extension appointment, but I also have a research appointment. So I do a lot of research around the state, trying to figure out best management practices for land application of manure.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Jeff, introduce.
Yes, I'm Jeff Gale. I'm the agent for agriculture and natural resources in Foster County, North Dakota.
All right, and then we'll move on to the important people, our compost producers, our expert panel. So why don't you guys introduce yourself, give a little quick intro of your composting operation, kind of refresh their memories from the videos that they watched of you. Steve, why don't we start with you?
I'm Steve Inger from Hatton, North Dakota, which is about 75 miles northwest of Fargo. I've been involved in composting since 2014 when I attended the Midwest Bio School in Deer Lodge, Illinois. From that time, I invested in a turner, and I do have a Settler turner. It's 12 feet wide, and I've done a multiple of different products that I've composed together, mostly what is available in our operation. So we do not have any livestock, so I clean a couple of feed yards for manure, and then most of the other stuff is from our own farming operation, the straw, the hay, the pea straw, soybean straw, or whatever. So we try to do around 1,500 ton of compost every year, and my goal was to do about a ton per acre for our 1,500 acre farming operation, but I'm I'm finding that I think we need to do better than that or more per acre. I think we've just been teasing our ground. I think we need a multiple more tons per acre. So when I first started, I figured, well, I can try to do a little bit from every acre, but I don't think it does the job. I think you have to have a pretty sizable amount of compost to make any effect on your in your farming operation. I am married and we'll be celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary next year. And we have one daughter and a son-in-law, and we just had a new grandson last December. So,
All right, thanks, Steve. Jay, will you go next?
Yes, hello, my name is Jay Schnell. I live in Wahpeton, North Dakota, which is about 45 minutes south of Fargo. I'm originally from Dickinson, North Dakota, and that's where I ended up starting my experience with composting back in about 2005. My father and I started looking into a better option for manure at his cattle auction market. So that's when it really piqued my interest. I was interested in farming, and I knew that we had this resource that needed to be utilized. And so that's when I also went to a Midwest Biosystems school down in Arkansas. We ended up, my dad bought a Midwest Biosystems, an AeroMaster Turner. And then well, it's been about 10 years ago now, I ended up getting an opportunity to farm with my father-in-law over here in Wahpeton. And he happened to have a feedlot too. So I was able to find another used AeroMaster Turner and basically do the same thing over here that I was doing there. We've got a 1,000 head feedlot that we run. So we've got anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 tons of just manure every year. And then I'm able to take some material from the city and some other raw materials around here. So we deal with a lot of material. I actually updated to a Wildcat Turner, which makes it's about a 14-foot wide by 6 feet high windrow. So with the two machines, I kind of have the best of both worlds in making compost. And so every year we deal with a lot of material. It's finding the time and the labor to do that. I have 4 kids. I'm married. I've been married for about 12 years. And so that's my story.
All right, thanks, Jay. I got a message that you sound a little quiet, Jay. So if you can, if you can lean in or speak up whenever you're speaking. Say that again, sorry?
Better?
yeah, that's better, Jay.
Okay.
Yeah, previously Steve was the quiet one, and now it's you, Jay. All right, Kurt, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Kurt Daigle, work for Olson Custom Farms in Hendricks, Minnesota. Our composting site, however, will be in South Dakota. So, and that's where our feedlot is. So we're under South Dakota regulations when it comes to our operation. So we're a little bit, but some of the things apply when you move compost or manure onto our fields in Minnesota. So I guess I'm the rookie of the bunch. Somebody has to be the rookie, but it's similar story. Went to Midwest Biosystems School in 2019 in Sedalia, Missouri. And that's who we kind of started having discussions with about 3 years ago. And so we've been working up towards our composting operation. We were hopefully going to be online already by the time this workshop was to occur, but due to the magnitude of our project, we aren't starting yet. We hope to be by the end of the month. We're working with consultants from Midwest Bio to make sure we get started right. And I'm only in charge of the background of the composting as far as how it integrates into our farm agronomy program. But we do have we'll have a site manager because of the scale of our composting operation. And that person will be working on the site April to October at least. So that's kind of We hope to use quite a bit of our compost, but we definitely want to market a large proportion of our compost in the future. So we're going to make different grades of compost.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. So we'll dive right into the questions. Remember, you can add questions to the chat box. We're going to start with one that came in through registration. Actually, quite a few of you asked kind of the same question about the materials and the specifics of what goes into your compost pile, what your ratio of different materials are, you know, corn stalks or bales of alfalfa or whatever you use, and how you get those materials and kind of the nuts and bolts of that, and how you decide what's your process to deciding what goes into that compost. We'll kind of go around again. We'll start with you, Steve, once again.
Well, I still, the last time, or what shows on the video is that this is our first time to do medium square bales and into our before we were using round bales and rolling them out. And I really like the square bales to start our compost. So our rows are about 180 feet long. So we line up, 30 bales end by end, and so we put in, they were right around 400 pounds to the bale, and then we added 15 bales of hay, and we actually run the turner through that. It does a beautiful job of fluffing it up, and then we would add to that about probably 100,000 pounds of manure, which would be a beef pack or from a feedlot. So that would be our mixture that we're using right now. We got it going about a week ago. It heated up right away to 140, 50 degrees, and I've been adding about 300 to 400 gallons of water per row per day, and it's probably going to be slowing down a little bit on the temperatures. Finally gotten moist enough so that I think we've got that 40 to 50% moisture, and we've had it has peaked at about 160 degrees, and after turning it, it'll probably get down to 140. So that's where we're at.
And how do you decide how much of everything you're putting in? Is it kind of by feel? Do you have a formula?
Well, I should have a formula, but I don't. I've been using pretty much what I've got available to me, and I've got to get into more of the science of the thing, and carbon nitrogen ratio and all that type of thing. But sometimes it's kind of what you feel and what it looks like, and what the final product is, and it's been turning out okay.
Okay. Jay, I know you've got a little bit of a different approach, some different challenges over there with your beets and such. Tell us about your process.
Well, I'd say it is best to be able to look at it to start with with your carbon source. If you can lay it out and you can begin your process thinking, I'm going to start with more of my carbon and then work my nitrogen source in, you can make a way better product. Now, the hard thing with that is sometimes it just doesn't work that way. With our feedlot, we use a lot of straw as bedding throughout the year. So when we clean out the feedlot, we already have a pretty good carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's probably on the low end of what I would like. But like I say, if you're going for a high quality product, if you can start with your carbon product, you're way ahead. And especially if you can get water on it and synchronize that right away. So the synchronization would be like Steve was talking about. You lay out your carbon product, whether it's straw or leaves or any of that woody material. You add water to it to get that stuff started. And then if you can come in and add the manure, if you're going for a high product, that's the way to do it. But like I said, for our process, I'm able to kind of get past that by putting everything together when I haul it out from the feedlot, and then seeing how it reacts once I start to go through the piles. And the biggest thing is you have to see where your temperature is and what your moisture level is. So the biggest thing out here is we're always very wet when I'm trying to turn my compost. So if I can start with a drier product, I'm way ahead. So I end up adding a lot of carbon material to my material as I'm going through the process.
Okay.
Can I
And-
comment here?
Yes, you may.
I guess I like to prefer to take my manure directly from the feedlot before it's been piled. You have less burning and less, heating of that. And then we get that wetter material in there. And we also, we work with a tree trimmer, and he always, it's available, in this last round, we added quite a few wood chips to it. And another thing we have always also done is adding clay to the mixture. So if you add clay to the mixture, it kind of helps with the odor, and also helps to retain a lot of the nutrients in your mix.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Kurt, what's your approach?
Well, it's good to see Jay's operation. Ours is going to be quite similar, other than we won't use beets, but we have the bed pack. So we kind of have the ideal starting material, and we have access to plenty of carbon sources. We raise native grasses for seeds, so we haven't utilized that carbon source, so we're going to use that instead of burning it and sending it up into the atmosphere, so that'll be good. And then we always have extra bales, whether they're oat straw, because we're seed producers, so we have oat straw, wheat straw, soybeans, corn stover, etc. So we feel we have all the material that we need to work with, but the bed pack is the key to the whole process for us.
Okay. A question that came in through the chat here from Josh is, does manure composting reduce the viability of weed seed germination? And I mean, I know in theory it does. What have you guys seen in practice? Steve?
Most of the time, if you get your 15 days of over 130 or 140 degrees, you see most of them are gone. But if you leave your piles out there, you will find there will be a few escapes out there, and we'll get some weed seeds growing on top of the pile, but it's not major.
Okay. Jay or Kurt, anything to add to that?
Other than from my research days when we'd work with plant material, 140 degrees is pretty lethal to seed viability. So
I would also say that, yeah, that's exactly right what Steve said. And we still spread a lot of manure, even with the composting. So the compost side of it will always be less weed seeds, but the problem we have run into is if we can't spread those compost piles out right away, being that we do take some dirt in with the compost, you're going to have some of those weeds growing in the piles at the end of the year. So when I'm talking to the people that buy my product, I can't guarantee a weed-free product. However, I do know that the seeds the majority of the seeds are burned, are destroyed in that process. So ideally, if you can start your process and you're turning those piles and you get them 4 or 5 times past that 140 mark, and then spread it or sell it, there's a good bet that those weed seeds will not be in there, as well as the harmful bacteria and most chemicals too. I know there's a question about some quality assurance, and we can get to that later, but for the most part, you are ridding that pile of those things.
And from what I understand in the research base of weed seed destruction in composting, there's a couple factors that depend on the amount of escapes. What kind of animal did the seed go through? Poultry and birds tend to do the best job of killing weed seeds. That gizzard does a really nice job. And then also the type and size of the weed seed. So the smaller, harder coated seeds are harder to kill. The grass seeds are easiest to kill. But yeah, that 140-degree mark is important. So another question that I have gotten a few people asking about is moisture management in your compost. What's the process of managing the moisture as the manure leaves and you begin the composting process? How do you manage water? How much rain per week if you don't add water? And then a specific question about Kurt's covers came up too. So when we get to Kurt, if you could talk about your moisture covers and that sort of thing. And so we'll start with Steve again.
Okay. You like to keep your moisture at least to 40 to 50%. And as a dry mixtures that I had with that straw coming in this year, it's taken me about a week, and I would guess there's probably about 3,000 gallons of water per pile that have been applied to it to get the moisture level up. And it'll taper off after this now, because then it'll we pull the water tank behind our turner, and it's kept with water. And now I'm finally, after a week's time, getting the moisture level in that straw up there with the way it should be, because we have different than the other that bring in just strictly the bed pack. You know, that's pretty moist, but when we put that moist bed pack into that straw, it really disappears, and it takes some water to get that into shape to where it should be, so that the microbes work well with the temperature and the moisture.
All right, Jay, what's your approach?
In a perfect world, I always like to start with a drier product. You can always make a better product, and it's easier to compost with a drier product. With that said, from my experience with our feedlot manure, these last few years have been almost unbearable from the standpoint of moisture just in general. So with that, I will pile up my manure in the feedlot to get the excess moisture out of it as much as I can. I am burning some nitrogen that way, but it also allows me to have a drier product when I bring it out from the feedlot and start my windrows. Now, I've taken the approach of a few different ways of doing it. One of them is my Wildcat turner is more probably a macerator than I would say an actual compost turner, which is really nice with starting my piles, because you know, those drums they're moving a lot faster than I normally would like, but when I go through my piles, it's drying it out every time I go through. So if I have that option, I can do that. Also, like I mentioned to Steve earlier, I have a bale processor, so I can keep adding a carbon source to dry it out. So one of the things I have always stressed with composting is, and I'm probably the epitome of this, is it's more of an art than a science. I haven't studied the science as much as I probably should, but I've been able to kind of figure out what it should look like, what it should smell like. And so that's kind of the art of it, is after doing it enough times, not that I'm an expert, of course, but with the material that I've dealt with, I can tell if I need to add a nitrogen source, if it's not heating up like it should. And then specifically dealing with the carbon source, you can, you know, if you have the equipment, you can go and add that as you're going on, as you're moving through the process.
All right, thanks, Jay. Kurt?
I guess I've never had a
Steve.
problem of not heating up. I don't know if Jay, I don't know if you have or not, but usually we get the heat, you know, we get it assembled, and you like to try to get as, you know, just like baking a cake, you know, your recipe, you get all your ingredients together, mix it up, try to do it as close to all of it as one time as you can. And then once I get the water in it, overnight, it's usually always heated up to its fullest degree.
All right, Kurt, you want to talk about your covers and specifically the investment on the covers, and is that worth it?
Oh, we'll probably know more in a year or so, but we feel it's going to be, because like Jay mentioned, you get into these wet cycles, and if you've gone several weeks down the road and you have good material and then you get too much rain on it, it's going to affect your correct moisture level in the windrows. And so we're going to have a lot of windrows at different time points. And we just want to make sure that we can control the moisture aspect of it versus Mother Nature throwing a wrench in it. So we know it's going to be more work, and it's about a $50,000 investment for the fabric covers. We have to add some chain to them to keep them weighted because North Dakota and Minnesota and South Dakota have plenty of wind. But we just need to control that variable if we're going to be at the scale of composting. We can't have rain set us back or make us start over a windrow because it got too wet or it gets too dry. We just want to be able to control that. So yeah, it's a substantial investment, but if we take care of them, they'll last several years.
Can I
Okay.
add something, Christine?
Yes, absolutely.
Along with this talk of what we've just been talking about, one of the things that really needs to be taken into consideration is your plot that you're composting. So for instance, where I'm at here, we have some heavy clay soils. And if we get any rain here, there's no way I can compost. I can't even get my machinery onto that ground to be able to compost. Now, we also are close enough to sandy ground. So I've found a huge difference in having a site that you can actually get your equipment on. When it's time to compost, when that windrow needs to be composted, if you can't get your equipment out there, there's no way you're going to do it. So I would say the covers like he talks about is a great option, to be able to keep that excess moisture out of the pile, but also along with that, if you can find a site that you can get that's level and drained, the drainage is incredibly important, but is a place you can also get your equipment over. That makes a huge difference, in getting out there to be able to turn it when it needs to be turned.
Can I comment on here too, please?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I do have covers and I've never used them. I got 3 covers when I bought. They're kind of a felt cover, but I've never used them. But the thing is that I think you can get a higher quality compost, and it's also predictable. You can predict the results with using covers. So you're basically more in control of your composting process.
Right. And along those lines of justifying the cost of things, economics is kind of something that has come up a lot. A question specifically came in, is Steve able to justify purchasing hay and straw to add to the compost? And just in general, your justification for economics for why this is important, maybe go back to your why this is from a economic side. So Steve, since the question was pointed directly at you, why don't you start?
Okay, I do not purchase straw and hay. It's some of it is the hay that we're using this year is left over from our first cutting. It was kind of our first start of doing haying, because our alfalfa field is certified organic. And we actually went in there. So we had a low relative feed value and lower protein. And it was, we wrap all of our bales. So we did get it up at we put it up at probably some of it was at 40% moisture. So it was probably not as a saleable product as we have. We do have a lot of straw that we have excess to. So we did, this last year, we had a couple 100 acres of rye, and we baled up all that straw. And then they may say, well, you're losing it on your ground, but at the same time, we had the regrowth that took care of that problem.
Okay. Jay, do you want to talk about the justification for economics and that sort of thing side of your operation?
Yeah, the nice thing for me was when I got started, I didn't have to pay any of the bills because my dad did. So, it was a classic example. As a business owner, he was spending upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 a year to have manure hauled out that wasn't being put on any of our own fields. We weren't farming, but that's kind of what got me interested is I knew it was a resource that could be utilized, and so for him it was a no-brainer. He's turned that into a money-making operation. Now, for me on this side of it, what we were faced with the feedlot was all of our ground around the farm has plenty of nutrients in it because of all the years that my father-in-law's father spread manure on the ground. Of course, that was closest, and so we wanted an opportunity, an option to move that product farther, but not spread all the water. And so it's worked out really well that we have with a load of manure versus a load of compost, you're hauling a lot of water away with that manure and not getting your bang for your buck. So for us, that was a big opportunity to save some money, I guess I would say. The other option was I got the machine, my first machine when I came out here, I got a really good deal on it, and I knew what the machine was capable of. And so from that standpoint, I felt like the cost, we could recoup those costs pretty quickly. Moving forward now, the other side of this is all of our P and K levels on our ground that we spread compost on. I don't know if I'm going to have to add anything in the future. My goal as a producer of farm crops, I'd like to use no synthetic fertilizer moving forward, and I think that's a real possibility. Is it as easy as just doing that? No, because it still scares me a little bit of not putting fertilizer down. But my goal moving forward, and I've started to do trials and of my own. My goal is that these machines are going to be able to allow us to not have to purchase any fertilizer down the road. That's my ultimate goal. So from an economic standpoint, the other side of that is a lot of material that I've been able to get other than the manure. I've gotten paid to take because it's a waste product, and so that to me has been the best part of the economic side is I've been able to generate revenue on the front end and also on the back end. So that's one of the things that I find so neat and intriguing about composting. There's not a whole lot of areas where you can get paid to take something, and then you also get paid on the back end. Whether it's applying it on your own land or selling it as a soil amendment. So,
in some years that we didn't do it this year, but we got all these road ditches, so we've actually green chopped road ditches, and it's made a really good material for nitrogen material to get those compost started.
All right, Kurt, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, we're in the same objective. We just had reached the limit of transport manure away from the feedlot. It just becomes economically and logistically impossible to get much more than a couple miles from the feedlot, and so all those acres that we manage there don't need any more fertility. So we just want to realize the benefits of our feedlot over a lot of our acres, and so you got to get it in a transportable form. And we wrestled with the cost analysis quite a bit because there's a cost to doing this. And of course, the easy button is, well, we can just purchase those nutrients, but compost does so many more things for you. So those are hard to put dollars on. And we have goals like Jay has. We're pretty much going to eliminate any synthetic P and K on a pretty rapid pace, other than very specific planter applied type situations. We're going to drive away from using much synthetic fertilizer other than nitrogen.
I think if we're going to do the full soil health benefits, we have to eliminate all the synthetic fertilizers.
Right. So we complement our compost applications will be complemented with acres that are cover cropped. We've been cover cropping about 2,000 acres every year for 4 years now. And so the acres that see cover crops will also see an application of compost. So we're integrating those two things together to become the new base of our fertility program.
This year we've got an experiment going, a quarter of an acre. We've interseeded, or we strip tilled corn into standing alfalfa, and the corn is growing with no extra fertilizer or no chemicals. It looks good right now. We'll see what the result is. And we seeded in 44-inch spacings, and we actually mulched the alfalfa between the rows to suppress weeds in the row.
That's a really interesting project, Steve. Don't tell extension people that. We'll be in contact to want to take some data or something from you. So Jay, you kind of touched on this a little bit, and it reminded me of the question that came in about equipment. So equipment is what a lot of people consider a big barrier to entry for composting, and getting the right equipment, and that kind of ties back in with economics as well. And I mean, what do you do if you don't have access to a skid steer or those sorts of things? So if you guys can kind of talk about your equipment and maybe challenges that came with that, how you decided what you wanted to use in your composting operation. Steve?
I started off with a turner. All of a sudden I got a turner. Now I got to start composting. And then all of a sudden I didn't have the right tractor for it. So I struggled the first year riding the clutch on a conventional tractor, and it was a real nightmare type of thing. So, like I think Jay mentioned, or we talked before, you have to have I ended up with a John Deere IVT transmission or a hydrostatic or some kind of a really slow, because you got to have a creeper gear, and not, you can't imagine how slow you have to go. I think probably the turtle even goes faster than what we did when we first start our composting part of it. So, but I mean, I think the people in the livestock business probably have more of the equipment available to you, but I was not in the livestock business. So, ended up by buying a payloader, a turner, and then we actually made a lot of our own equipment. We made the water tank that we pulled behind the turner, and we made some spears or whatever, rollers to unroll bales and all that kind of things to help to alleviate the situation. But I think the biggest thing to get going is a turner and the right tractor to run it. You can improvise with a lot of other things.
All right, Jay, you kind of talked about your equipment already.
Yeah, I guess I'll touch on a couple things. The mistake we made right away was not having the right equipment for the amount of material. You have to start with the amount of material that you're going to deal with. So we ended up buying without really doing enough research, we ended up buying a skid steer mounted turner right away. And that was a complete waste of time. We had just way too much material for that. So if I were to recommend somebody, if they want to compost, I would recommend getting a compost turner. You don't need a big one, because you can always, depending on your amount of land that you have to deal with, you don't need a big one. If you're landlocked, then you would need a bigger machine to deal with more material. But like I talked in my video, what's neat is with the feedlot operation, most of the equipment kind of translates over to getting started composting, other than a turner. So if I were to start and I'd say, well, how can I do this the most cost efficient way where I don't have to buy anything more? I would start with just a regular horizontal beater spreader, and you can do a pretty good job of getting a manure pile started just by making windrows or building a big pile by running it through that manure spreader. It's going to start to heat it up. After that, then though, you need to decide what your end goal is. Are you going to just spread it on your ground right away, or do you want to make compost? It's hard to make really good compost, I would say, without a turner, unless you're going to get into the aeration tubes, any of those higher ends, things, which we don't need to get into here, but that's the other option. But getting back to the feedlot side of it, we already had all the loaders we needed. We have dump trucks, we have, bale processors, all that stuff. Really, if if I were to start tomorrow with the stuff that we have today, all I would need to purchase is a turner. That's it. And there's very few businesses where that barrier of entry is that way if you already have the feedlot with that equipment. So, but it's just like anything, like Steve said, there's a lot of opportunities. I know of guys that have even built their own compost turners. If you have old beet lifters around or anything with gearboxes and hydraulic motors, a good fabricator could make one really cheaply. So I wouldn't look at it and say, well, I can't afford to get into composting, because there's a lot of ways around that. And all you're doing is basically mixing that material up anyway and letting the microbes do most of the work.
Yeah, we're going to use a 17-foot Midwest Biosystems Aeromaster turner. And like Jay, we have most of the complementary equipment. We've got bale processors. We did invest in another payloader and skid loader, so we don't co-mingle our equipment that handles feed and that sort of thing. We didn't want to have that commingling to contaminate compost. So we kind of dedicated some equipment just to that. But yeah, the turner's the key part of that. We thought about building our own water tank because we have some fairly handy individuals on our farm, but we just decided to purchase that as well for the sake of time. But yeah, the turner, I think, is the key to that. Moving the compost around, we have side dumps and live bottom trucks, so we kind of already have all that covered except for the turner.
Okay. So let's take a step back here. So kind of back to the basics here. Like, how often do you clean out your feedlots and start a windrow composting pile? Do you age your manure before you compost it? Give me the rundown of your step-by-step, how you first start the compost pile, how often you turn it, that sort of thing. Be as specific as possible. Steve?
I guess I prefer not to use aged manure, but I always do. But I like I said earlier, I would prefer just to take it right out of the feed yard and haul it in and dump it in with our dry straw. And I don't know if we lose much by you always see that burning, and that where it gets so hot that you see the ashes from the straw in the piles when you pile it up. I mean, it heats up very quickly. So another thing is that what I really like is to combine my piles late in the fall before freeze up, and let Mother Nature do its job of it kind of cools it down, and then you can start it back up in the spring again. So and it doesn't take us long, and you eliminate a lot of your work by putting it together in the fall.
All right, Shay?
I guess I'll start it from the start. We use a lot of corn stalks and straw for bedding during the winter for our feedlot. So we try to build a base out in our lots where the cattle can be dry and warm. We keep adding to that pile. We'll, on a per bale basis, we probably use about 500 corn stalk bales a year, sometimes as much as 1,000. But then we let those piles build up throughout the winter. We just keep adding and adding and adding. And then I try to go out in the middle of the summer if it's dry enough. The last 2 years have been crazy, so I'm going to throw those out. But I'll take. We actually have an excavator, so I'll pile those piles of manure and corn stalks and straw as high as I can get them to get the excess moisture out of it. Then when we can get it in the feedlot with trucks. We haul out the windrows with or haul out the manure with trucks, put them in windrows. You know, the length varies depending on what we're going to do, but I lay them out, and then I go through my piles twice right away. With this Wildcat turner that I have, like I say, it's more of a macerator than a compost turner in my opinion, but that really helps in getting that particle size down. So I'll run through one time and then run through it again just to get the particle size down and to get the process started. Most of the time I base my turning on whether or not I need to dry it out a little bit. I hate to say that, but sometimes I will do that, or I add straw to that. But also based on the temperature, I let it get up in between that 40 and 150 range, and then it brings it back down once I run through with the machine. Now, I have not had to add any moisture, any water in the last 2 years, just because that's just the way it's worked out. I would rather add water. It's kind of a tedious thing, but you have more control that way. But with the situation the way it is now, I'll turn those piles. Most of the stuff that we utilize on our own farm. And so I am not taking it to a finished processed compost product. I'm turning it probably a total of 5 to 6 times, because I want to get to that number 4 to make sure that I have those weed seeds killed. And I know that that's a pretty good product. Now, if I'm going for a good end product, which I do on a basis when I know that's the stuff I'm going to sell, I'll turn that stuff 15 to 20 times. You know what I mean? Based on, again, the temperature and the way that it looks. And so that you're not, most people aren't going to do that with all their stuff, but that's the way you get a better product. So on a good year, in my process, I've gotten to a finished product in as little as 2 months. That's in perfect conditions, but most of the time it'll take probably 4 to 5 months to get a finished product. So that's kind of what it is for me.
Kurt, you don't really have a process quite yet, but what's your plan?
Our plan, so the feedlot, you have to keep, Jay would know that you got to keep your area in front of the bunks for a monoslope buildings like we have. See, that material has to come out every week, just depending on if you get rain or snow, just to keep that clean and eliminate that moisture. And so that material, that needs to go. So within our site, we have a stockpile area, and that material has a lot of water. So we know right away we have to put some carbon in it to get it more solid. And that was always a real burden for our feedlot manager to deal with that type of manure because it has a high liquid content. And so that'll be pretty routine. And if we don't have enough of that material to make windrows, that'll just be stockpiled until we clean out pens. As far as the pens getting cleaned out, they'll be on a schedule, but it'll be like April, and then another time is closer to fall. And so like Steve, we're gonna build a lot of windrows, and what we're gonna put them to bed for winter. Cover them and then work with them in April or when the temperatures get suitable again. And then we know we'll have more pens come out and start those windrows in the summer and then spread. So we'll have different maturities, but yeah, we'll put a lot to bed in the winter just because that your pen clean outs don't match exactly with the unfrozen times up here in the Northern Plains. So we need to have windrows ready to go right away in the spring.
I've had windrows in the wintertime 20 below, and the windrows are still 120 degrees.
Yeah. And we'll work with ours if we see those situations too. Right now we're being conservative in what we can do in the winter.
Steve, do you reduce turning then in the winter so that they don't cool down and they keep that internal heat?
I have, in some winters, I have turned in the wintertime when it's cold, but the last few years I have not. I've kind of let it do its own thing. So a lot of times I will just mix up the manure with the straw, maybe not even add a lot of water to it. And it seems to, the microbes still go to work. And it's not a finished product by spring, but it certainly uh, uh, has has done its job over the winter months, and it saves a lot of time in turning or whatever you work into it. It's kind of does it its own thing.
Okay, let's shift directions a little bit. We had a question come in about, can you address any issues with herbicide residue in compost? Have you guys dealt with anything like that? Steve, we'll start with you.
I have not. I just heard of the people saying that be careful. You know that there's carryover of the residue in your compost, so be careful of what you put it on. And I guess I've not had a problem.
Jay, anything from you?
Yeah, actually, my dad in Dickinson had an issue, a horrible issue about 5 years ago, where the majority, or it wasn't the majority, but there was a lot of people, gardeners, that came back and said none of their plants grew. And so he looked into it, and he actually had clopyralid that was in his compost. And so that kind of opened my eyes to this idea that, yeah, it's composting is a great thing, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to go the way you want it to go. And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to separate material that I bring on the farm from the city or wherever I get it. And also, you know, I know what's going into our feedlot. We don't buy a whole lot of hay, and when we do, we know who we're getting it from. So it is a real issue, and I think moving forward, it's going to be even a bigger issue. And I hope even as a sector within the composting world that you know, it's not a good thing either. I mean, I hope we can figure out, you know, those issues, because it's expensive to get that stuff tested too. And we know we're doing the right things from the mechanical side of it, but who knows sometimes what you're putting into that pile. So I would say you have to make sure you know what you know, where you're getting your feedstocks from, and even that within that, you know, if you have an end user, you need to make it clear that, you know, for the most part, you probably know what's going in there, but you can't guarantee everything is going to go perfectly. So yeah, firsthand, we've had that issue, and I think what they came to find out was I think the actual chemical was Milestone that my dad dealt with. So yeah, that was not a good deal.
For those of you that don't know, maybe I should explain what the issue with herbicides can be in compost. So when you're adding plant material, either as an add-in after the manure has been added or whatever, or as a feedstuff for the livestock, the herbicides used, some herbicides, not all of them, can pass through the animal and still be active in the manure, or any herbicides added to any additives, hay, that sort of thing, can also still remain active in the compost, meaning that when you spread it on your field, if the next crop will grow is something that would be sensitive to that herbicide, it won't grow, or it'll die, or it'll get burned, that sort of thing. Sometimes if you get your compost from like a community composting center and you're not exactly sure what's been put there, and people have had issues with that where they bring it home, put it on their tomatoes, and oh no, what happened to my tomatoes? Because you don't know exactly where this community source is coming from. So that's the issue there.
I think that if you want to test yourself, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think if you try to plant tomatoes into it as a test, I think that's the most susceptible crop that would be the most sensitive to chemical carryover in your compost. Is that correct or not?
That sounds right. Yeah, it seems like it's always tomatoes that the people get upset that they got burnt or damaged or killed from compost.
And I think if you plant onions in there, that will tell you how much mycorrhiza fungi you have, because it'll show up. I think the roots will show up a different color.
And I see in the chat the question from Tim, does heat from the compost take care of the herbicide residue? And then Melissa answered that farther down. No, not always. The heat doesn't degrade all types of herbicides. Some are really persistent. Some can last for 6 years. Some of them are really, really persistent. Okay, I know we didn't talk about it in the videos, and I know our 3 producers don't tend to talk about or don't do this type of composting, but the static pile, the PVC perforated pipe sort of thing, I was going to just avoid that topic altogether, but I keep getting questions about it and people keep asking, is this something I can do so I don't have to churn my pile? So do you guys have any knowledge, any wisdom to share on that, Steve?
I do. I started static compost. I went online and looked at Dr. David Johnson out of New Mexico State. If you go online, he will talk about static composting. So what we did is we made a bin of 4 by 4 by 5, and then we made holes in the bottom of the bins, and 9 of those holes, and we put 4-inch PVC tubes down in there, and then we filled the bins with the same kind of composting or the same material that we did in our regular piles. And then you need to leave those tubes in there for 3 days, so the temperature will get up to over 140 degrees, and that will qualify it as organic. Then you pull the tubes out and then let it cool down, and you water it and put worms in there, and they will do the static composting for you. And it takes about a year. And this is our first year of doing this. And we actually we did an extract of this material, about 2 pounds of compost into about 20 gallons of water. We put it down the furrow as a mycorrhiza fungi. And to do the mycorrhiza fungi to work properly, you need it in the furrow so it can attach to the roots as they germinate. I have also added it to looking at putting it into our piles too. But when we did the test on this, the static compost was a lot higher in mycorrhiza fungi than the windrow piles.
All right, Jay, do you have any additional wisdom on that?
I actually, the only time I've ever really dealt with this is reading, like Biocycle magazine and reading some of the material. I don't have any personal experience on it, but I did visit a composting operation. I think it's south of St. Cloud. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It's right next to I think it's a chicken processing plant. But it's a really neat operation. And so that would be my recommendation is to check out an actual operation like that. I can try to figure out where exactly that was, but I know they had the tubes, and I think they actually, if I remember correctly, they took the cargo containers that you see everywhere. They were putting their material in those big cargo containers. So it looked really interesting to me. I personally have no desire to do that myself, but my recommendation, and I know guys that do it, and I think it does make a really good product. But I would recommend visiting one of those sites to see how that works.
Great, thanks, guys. It would appear Kurt has dropped off the call. I don't know if he lost internet or is having connectivity issues, but we'll keep plugging away here. So let's talk about the barriers and challenges to composting. When you started, as you've gone on, what are the biggest challenges, and how have you overcome those? Steve?
I have, I hear some of you talk about the regulations, and for where I'm at, I basically don't have any, regulations, and we're far enough from people don't live close to us. So, and I don't compost in the same place where we live, but anyway, we didn't have any, we haven't had any complaints from, the neighbors, because we don't have really any close neighbors around. I think a lot of the obstacles that people have are themselves. I mean, you have to accept, that you're going to do it, and if you can't accept that, then if you're going to do it haphazardly, there's really no use in doing it. And the biggest thing, and this all comes back to soil health, and where we want to improve our soils and whatever. And I always look at how and why. And most of the people don't know why they're doing things. And I think they need to figure out why they're doing it. And if they know why they're doing it, they'll figure out how to do it. And I think there should be some things going on that will help people to assess their soil health. And I think there's a lot of people working on it, but I don't think it's has detailed or whatever that should be. Everybody tell you need to do cover crops, you need to do compost, you need to do this, you need to do that, and what are the results? And I don't think we always have those answers for people, other than say you need to try it. I mean, I've tried a lot of things, and I still believe in it, but I still need to. You need to assess where you're at before you start. Get a benchmark of where you're at, and you can monitor your improvements.
Jay?
I don't know if I can follow that. No, he addresses a great question. It's the why we do it, and I think about this a lot. I mean, why do we in general do the things that we do? I being in the agriculture field, along with the composting, struggle with this idea of, how do we get past the NPK thing, pushing NPK all the time? It's just, that's all that is ever really talked about. I think that's changing, which I think is a good thing. So with that, I guess the barriers. Now, do you want us to touch more on the, like you said, the regulation side, or is it just getting into the composting? Because I think they're two different things. Any thoughts on that?
Both, either.
One interesting thing that I know you didn't want us to talk about the, past the manure side, but in dealing with the municipal side of it, I've come to the realization that there are barriers, but with that, it also has forced me to do my homework and to do due diligence. And what I found is I think what's neat is we're doing something that is above and beyond what's required of us. So for instance, the composting, we have our best management plans for the manure usage with our feedlot, but if we're going above and beyond what is required of us, people really like to see that, especially the people, within the government. And so I've learned a lot in having to, file for different things, with the leaves and the grass, and also with the manure, just to show them, what we're doing on our operation. And I've had some good responses to that. So with regards to the regulations, there isn't a whole lot of barrier to start composting. With our feedlot, we really didn't have to do anything different. So with that, once you reach a bigger amount, with a feedlot, with your waste management, that's when you get into the more regulation and the more hoops you have to jump through. But you know, the barriers to getting into composting, I would agree with Steve. It's knowing why you want to do it. I don't think everything has to be a perfect compost product. There's, you know, all compost is not created equal, is another thing that I've heard. You know, as long as you're turning it 4 times, in my opinion, you've got a better product than you started with. And to me, that's the neat thing about the composting is, in general, is we're taking a product that looks bad, it smells bad, people don't like it, into something that it smells like dirt, it looks like dirt, and you've got a good story at the end of the day. And so, you know, I think that's on the reverse side of the barrier. I think we're doing something that that is, it's, first of all, it's kind of a neat thing. It's as old as time, and people, I find myself talking about compost with pretty much everybody for some reason. It doesn't matter what field of work they are. They, for some reason, if they garden or if they have anything to do with, you know, the land, if they want it, you know, everybody eats food, they like to talk about it. So I think it's a great time also with what's going on with the world. With, I think we're going to see more localized marketing. And so I think it's a good time to take advantage of that, and composting is a big part of that. It's a great asset to that. So with the barriers, I think there's also great opportunities, I guess, is what I would say.
That was a great sales pitch, Jay. I appreciate that. So let's talk about the soil health effects. You hear about that a lot. Composting improves soil health. Have you seen any of that in your experience? Have you measured your soil health since you started using compost, or just anecdotal things you've seen in the field? Steve?
I guess when I first started in probably 2008, started no-tilling, and it's just, I mean, most people are looking at one remedy, and it's not going to be one remedy to any of the problems that they've created over the years. So I look at it as the systems approach. So whether it be, you know, you've got your cover crops, you've got your composting, and no-till, whatever it is that fits your operation, it's going to all benefit the soil health. You go to the field, and I very seldom go to the field without taking the spade with me. So you dig down with that spade, and you smell, you look at the color, you count the worms, look at your aggregation in your soil. If you've got any, a lot of people don't have any aggregation in their soils. To build aggregation is just it's all your microbes, your mycorrhizal fungi, your worms, you name it. It's all there. But I look at compost as a food source. I read an article, you know, this last winter. I think I mentioned it in the pre-interview, that the microbes break it down for the worms, and the worms will cycle it. And I know I read an article a few years ago that, you know, for the plant to use it, it has to fit through an eye of a needle, and that has to be pretty small, the nutrients. So the worms will do that, but the microbes, the worms, and your food network is so important that we have lost in most of our fields today. When I first started, I thought of what it was really, you know, a really good benchmark for me would be organic matter, but it still is. But it's so, the changes are so minute. It's hard to visualize. But I think the other visuals, I know I started using my pedometer this year, pushing in the soil. All of a sudden, I just went to the floor, the 3 feet down, and basically no restrictions. We're looking at, we got aggregation, we got worms in our soil, so we're getting some benefits. But I think what my next step is, which I'm headed to, is we're heading a lot of our stuff to organic, and preferably no-till if that's possible. But We're experimenting with some things, but we have to get real soil health. You have to eliminate your synthetic fertilizers and chemicals, and that's tough to do to get the full benefit of what Mother Nature can do for us.
Jay?
Well, I'm on kind of a different journey, and I war with this a lot on where our farm is going. I think our biggest barrier right now is we have sugar beets, and sugar beets are incredibly hard to do anything concerned with soil health. And so where I'm at right now is I'm trying to figure out how we can still stay in our same farming practice, but also kind of have the best of both worlds, where we can put back and add all that organic matter that we have with our compost. As I mentioned earlier, all of our ground around the farm is incredibly high in all the nutrients. We have PK, micros are all high. Organic matter is through the roof. So part of that is I've tried to add now the compost to our farther away soil that might be poor quality soil, and I'm hoping within the next couple of years we can see that jump, we can see that bump with our soil tests. So I've looked a lot at no-till. I love the idea of doing no-till. I've tried it in spurts, and it's a hard thing. In a perfect world, I would love to do all no-till, but again, in talking about the composting, these last few years have almost been unbearable as far as the moisture. Not to say that it can't work, but there is the other side of it that there's more to it than just doing exactly what I would like to do. What I will say is I've seen a lot of good, not data, but in Dickinson, where I started off, we've got poor quality soils. My dad has been applying compost now for 10 years on actual pasture ground, and he's seeing huge differences. He's seeing better water holding capacity. He's seeing, being able to put denser amount of cattle per acre because the grass is better. The cattle will actually, I have not seen this myself, but people have claimed that cattle will go to a composted area on grass. And I believe that. They can tell where the better nutrient value is in the grass. So a lot of where I'm coming from is I haven't done enough data myself to say that it's the key to everything, but I know it's the right thing to do, and I know we can get those nutrients back on the soil. We can recycle those nutrients. In my case, ideally, I'd like to have a self-sufficient farm where I'm feeding my animals with the crops that I grow that are being fertilized by their own manure, their own raw material. That to me would be an incredible thing, is to keep everything on farm, and then to have a product that you can say is, in my opinion, be the epitome of local, of not necessarily organic, but again, with this marketing idea, it would be something I hope people would resonate with. So it still is a journey for me, trying to figure out where we're going with the farm. But I do see, even with the manure, there's a benefit to it, and I would love to get away from using synthetic fertilizer.
I'd like to add a comment here. Is I think we have to all, I guess my objective is to get nutrient dense food, and I think we're far removed from that. And where I'm working on that is through our alfalfa, because we sell alfalfa to the dairy industry, and it's, you get paid for quality there, and that's what I'm hoping we can do with some more of our commodities that we grow.
Jay, would you talk a little bit about the marketing side of your operation? I know that's something you're into.
On which part?
Jay and your marketing.
Okay.
If you just talk a little bit about that. And
You want me to go first? Otherwise, Steve, I'm sure he's been.
No, go ahead.
Well, that's what I was hoping to learn today. That's the one area that I've really struggled with, is I really enjoy making the product. And so I've warred, I war a lot with how do I maximize my opportunity to profit from what I'm doing. We're saving money on fertilizer, so I think that's an economic part of this. The marketing side, a lot of it, right now, most of it is just word of mouth. I have business cards that I give out. People know that I have a product, but I've really not gone to the extreme. I've not pushed my product yet, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to go about that. Everyone asks, well, why don't you put it in bags? Well, it's not that simple. If you want to put it in bags, you're going to have to compete with a low-cost producer trying to get into Walmarts, and that's not to say it can't be done. That is probably the ultimate goal. However, I get a lot of repeat people, just gardeners, just local gardeners that buy it every year, and so I've got my price that I charge on a per skid steer bucket basis. My dad now has been selling for about, well, it's over 15 years, and he gets a lot of repeat customers. They're making a profit by selling their compost. And so I know it can be done. Right now, it's a matter of, do I want to spend my own time on the road trying to sell that product? Do I want to utilize it on the farm? Do I want to do a little bit of both? Or do I want to, really get after it and hire somebody to do that? I believe I've got a good product. I'm sure Steve has a really good product too that we could put up against probably anybody. Even, the stuff you get from Walmart, whether it's Miracle-Gro or Scott's, it's not a very technical composted product. It's something they can put in a bag and call compost. So, there is opportunities there. And so, if I had all the time in the world, I'd probably contribute all my time to marketing, but I don't have that opportunity as of right now. So moving forward, I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that.
How do you ensure that you've got a quality product to market?
How am I sure?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest reason is I get my product tested, so I send it to the lab. The other one is just based on, and I think Steve can attest to this, based on Midwest Biosystems quality aspects of when to turn and how to turn and how much to turn. I know that I know that I'm making a good end product by doing that, and with the feedstocks that I have. I like to tell a lot of people that, in my opinion, the manure, and that's what's neat about having manure compost. To me, the manure is kind of the magic elixir. I hear from people out west, they pay for their nitrogen source, in the Washingtons and or Oregons, and they have way too much carbon source, but they don't have the nitrogen source that we do. And a lot of it is manure. And so I think if you can start with manure product, you've already got a really good leg up to making a really good high quality product. Now that does take a lot more work and effort, but if that's your end goal, having that manure to start with is a good way to do it.
A quick follow-up question came in for that. When you have your product tested, does that include a measurement of residual pesticide that may be in the product?
I have personally never had that done because, to be honest, it's extremely expensive. That's not to say that it wouldn't be worth doing, and that's, I guess, looking at it again, going back to the barrier question, before I get into selling it on a large scale basis, that I decide I'm really going to do this. That's one area that I want to make sure that I have a uniform product, that I have a good quality product, and then along with that, and this is another topic, but I'm in the process right now of getting OMRI certified. I know Washington State has a certification process, and that's kind of where my next step is to go, is then I know that I can have something that says that somebody else is looking at my product, and that it's not USDA certified. There's no such thing as USDA certified compost organic, but there is labels that you can get on your product, and that OMRI certification is the one that I think would be really beneficial to marketing compost.
At this point, I have not tried to do any marketing of any compost. I've given some away to some neighbors that want some, but I've been pretty much using our compost for our own use, and I just feel a little more confident in not trying to sell it, because you need to have a uniform, consistent product, and it takes some time to get that developed.
Okay. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about liquid manure. Now, you guys don't deal with liquid manure, but there's a question of, is there an entry point for farmers to compost liquid manure? And I think this kind of ties in with a couple questions we've gotten about swine composting and why that might be unpopular and how hog composting might be done. Just any thoughts about that sort of thing? Steve?
Well, I think, if I had a source of liquid manure, I could, with our straw source, you could easily utilize that as your liquid product, and for the liquid, and compost that with straw. But I think you need a lot of the carbon, whatever it is, to go along with that liquid. I don't have any experience with manure.
Jay, anything to add?
Well, this has been an interesting topic that I've looked a lot into, because I think it would be a really good option. Now, one thing I have done is I've utilized our lagoon water from our feedlot, which isn't the same thing, but it does have those nutrients in. So I think anything that has that nutrient value in would be a good thing, especially if you're adding water, like Steve said. And to make a good product, I mean, you still want to be able to add that moisture. So I would agree with Steve that if you have a lot of carbon source, you could make a really good product using that swine, whether it's swine or liquid dairy manure. I know for the most part they inject it, and because of the volume, and so that would be the scary thing, is in most cases I think it's just so much material that I don't know if you could get enough carbon source. But to start on a small scale, rather than just putting straight water on your carbon source, you would be able to add nutrients to it and microbes, which I think would be a great thing. I think you'd be killing two birds with one stone, and I think at the end of the day, I think it's a better utilization of that product anyway. But I think the barrier to that is just the sheer amount of material that they deal with. So I know that there's people that do that they utilize it as a moisture additive to their compost rather than just straight water, and they've had really good success with that.
As a side note, as something came to mind here, is that I don't know if any of you mix other nutrients or commercial fertilizers in with your compost, but it's a good way to use your mixer, add fertilizer to your compost, and spread it out as a more uniform product for your particular soils.
I wanted to point out that certification that Jay was talking about is the OMRI certification, and Melissa put a link in the chat for more information about that if you're interested. So check out the chat box for that. So issues with pests in your compost, fly management, wildlife, any vermin or anything digging into the pile, that sort of thing. What has been your experience with that and how to control it? Steve?
Basically, the only thing I have is flies, but the wildlife doesn't seem to be of any bother. The flies are just a matter of a nuisance for your own thing, but I think that you may be able to manage that too with different, maybe different mixtures of your composting.
Jay?
Initially, if you leave your material and don't start the process is where you have the issues. It's no different than leaving it in a feedlot or in a pile. You're going to have those flies. But what's really fascinating to me is once you turn it basically twice, which I do right away, there's nothing. There's no flies. I haven't had issues with other types of insects. Not that they're not there, but that heat in the process is what gets rid of all that. And so after about, well, like I say, after 2 times and then starting the process, I have absolutely no issues with the flies. And it's interesting because the stuff that I compost, which is right next to the feedlot, has absolutely no flies, but you walk, 10 feet away from the feedlot and then you've got flies all over. So it's really neat to see that. And especially if you have a pile of manure on one side and you have a pile that you're already turning, it's night and day difference. As far as pests and animals, the only time I've had any issues is if I'm doing mortalities in a windrow. You'll get coyotes sometimes, that'll come through and scavenge a little bit. I've done some, even some dead, some birds. I've done, some of that. And so anytime you do that, that's where you have the issues.
Are there any differences in quality or processing when using different types of manure, such as horse manure or other animal manure for different animal types? Is there a difference in what you do?
This is Steve. No, not really. I've done horse manure and also blended in with regular beef pack, and I guess I have not done anything different. When I first started, I did a little poultry litter, and I don't know. I probably didn't know enough to know the difference, but anyway, at that point. But anyway, I just have not done anything really any different.
Okay, anything?
Yeah, I like dealing with horse manure because it's so dry to begin with. So you can tell the difference right away with horse manure. I've done, that the majority of what I do is pen pack from feedlot. But in the research that I've done, and I've never been able to do it, but supposedly sheep manure is incredibly good compost from a nutrient perspective. So that's one of them that, there's not a whole lot of sheep around here that I know of, but if there was any, I would definitely try it. And so the research has shown that there is a difference, but I think you can add material or leave out material through the process to get the product that you want. And at the end of the day, I don't really think there's that much difference between, say, even the horse and the cattle. It's just dealing with the dry and the wet material, I guess I would say is the biggest issue there. But there's also been there's people that are composting animal manure from zoos. There's anything like that. All that stuff can be composted, and so it's another example of utilize what you can get your hands on. That's a big part of it. Is the majority of that stuff, it'll all break down. It's just a matter of getting used to how it's going to break down and then utilizing it. So use what you got.
Would you say some of the differences are more based on what the bedding was originally rather than the actual manure itself?
That could be.
Like horses tend to use sawdust more than
Yeah.
you would find sawdust in
There's
it.
probably some truth to that. I would say that's probably part of it, but I think just in general, you get the clumps of the horse manure versus the patties, I guess you would say, of the cow manure. But again, in both of those cases, you can kind of tweak what it looks like based on adding your carbon source. And then, like Steve mentioned earlier, I like to get as much, if I have the opportunity to put diversity in, I'll mix everything that I can in there. I think that's the best way to go about it if you know what you're doing. And you're going to figure it out after a while anyway. You're going to kind of see how the stuff reacts. So if you can get your hands on all types of that manure, I think that's the way to go.
Feedstocks can be defined as anything that once grew.
Okay. So we had a question about antibiotics persisting in finished compost. Now we had talked about herbicides persisting and becoming residual in compost. And I see Melissa posted some more information about herbicide resistance also in the chat box. And then Melissa mentioned some stuff about the research behind antibiotics persisting. Melissa, do you want to talk about that real quick?
I've read some, I'm coming from a research background, so I've just read some studies that found composting does help degrade a lot of antibiotics, unlike the herbicides, which can be, some of them can be really persistent. It does seem like a lot of the antibiotics that they've measured, and that's always the thing here, like they don't always measure every type of antibiotic, but the types that they've measured, most of them do become degraded as you compost. But it also depends on what temperature it gets to and things like that to how degraded they get.
Steve or Jay, have you had any experience with antibiotics persisting in manure at all? Is that a no from both of you?
No, I have not.
No, I have not either. And it's one of those things that that has been touched on, and I've read a little bit about it, but compared to the pesticide and the chemical residue, I really haven't dealt with it at all. So not that it can't be that it can't persist in there, but I think that's kind of the beauty of the process is you know, you get that heat up there enough, it's gonna do the job for the most part that it's supposed to do. So
I would think with the different manures and stuff, you would have different microorganisms that would come in with from that, right? Am I right or wrong?
From what I understand, yes, definitely. Like dairy and cattle or bovine species, they have those 4 stomachs, so they'll have a different kind of microbiome than hogs and chickens will. Although I'm not a microbiologist, so my biologist friends tell me that the things that live in a gut are not necessarily the things that would like to live in a compost pile. So sometimes you kind of switch what types of microbes might live in these different environments once they're out of the animal, so to speak.
All right. Oh, Kurt's back. Welcome back, Kurt.
Yeah, I had to drive 10 miles down the road to my house where we have fiber optic internet.
That's what I figured might have happened, that you dropped.
Yeah, we're pushing our system today. My fellow agronomist, he has online training, and we put a lot of demand on satellite internet. So.
Well, we're glad you're back. You didn't miss a whole lot.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, Christine,
Yes.
Kurt might have interesting things to say about marketing. Weren't you going to try to do a lot of marketing, Kurt?
Yeah,
Oh.
we're gonna look into doing quite a bit of marketing. We feel that's gonna when we did our cost analysis, we feel we have to sell a fair amount of compost to justify all the investment we're making. And so we want to be a certified vendor to Minnesota DOT and South Dakota DOT. We want to market to horticulture companies, because that in the past, being a specialty crop grower, if you want good compost, the biggest detriment to getting it is you have to order a whole truckload of it because of the freight. Well, if there's more regional compost providers, then that freight cost goes down. So we hope we can be a regional source for high quality compost. But that's looking down the road a little ways. But our site is real close to the interstate, so we feel we have a strategic advantage there.
Okay. So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about regulations and policy and that sort of thing, and maybe incentive payments, what sort of things does it take to start? I know, Kurt, you've got the challenge of being in Minnesota and South Dakota and that sort of thing. What kind of, and I understand this is going to, differ for everyone around the country and around the world, really. Steve, why don't we start with you?
And I don't know if I have not seen anything that any incentive other than your own incentive to do anything. I don't think anybody cares if you compost or not, from even the soil health people, you know. I don't know. I just don't see that there's going to be any kind of incentive from the government, unless, you know, some of these government programs are pushing the soil health and are trying to utilize some of these other resources. But I think basically you're going to be on your own.
Jay, anything to add to that?
Well, I think we're fortunate on, again, to touch on the manure side of it. I think that's where it's going. Not that it's going to be incentivized, but it's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? To compost, I think, like I said before, you're taking it a step further than what is required of you, and I think that's a good thing if you're looking at composting. Where the barrier or where the problems are in my experience is when you start taking material that's not considered manure, because I deal with leaves and grass and other things, and that's where it gets tricky. And it's funny to me because, you know, at the end of the day, you mix all that stuff up, it's a composted product, but yet you have your material from the feedlot and then you have your other material. And so there's a lot of questions on who's got jurisdiction when you're dealing with taking that product. So I hope, not that I hope there's a government program to incentivize, but I think just talking earlier about what the market is desiring, I think that's what's gonna push it. Is people are gonna demand, like they already have started, whether it's organic or local or non-GMO, that product that we make, that compost product that we make, is going to be worth something. Now, one of the hard things with that though is what is it worth? You know what I mean? Do you sell it on a NPK basis on what a farmer is going to put on his field? Do you sell it as a soil amendment? So there's a lot of different things that go into that. But I think getting into it right now, I think the market is gonna demand a product like this in the future. I think it's already started, and so how that's gonna all end up, I don't know for sure, but I think that's the way that it's going.
Kurt, anything to add?
Yeah, as far as incentivizing, like, well, just to start composting, we looked into, so from the ground up, we looked at, we could have, for our site, we could have maybe got some cost share, but we didn't want to have the extra regulatory. We thought we were already being over-regulated. That's kind of that fine line. It's like we're making, a soil amendment, compost, and so it often gets lumped together with manure management and how those things are treated from a water quality standpoint. And I wish it wouldn't be all grouped together like that, but that's why we feel we'll have more flexibility with manure, especially in Minnesota, as more water quality, and they've changed. Our area isn't too affected by fall fertilizing regulations that have just been adjusted, but I just see that moving more and more that way. So compost, I think, is going to give us greater flexibility, as long as it's not tightly linked to what we consider manure or inorganic fertilizer. I'd rather see it be looked at as a soil amendment, since the nutrients are more tightly resemble, humus versus something that will contaminate the water readily.
All right. Next is a real question. How prevalent is composting in your area? Are you the exception or the rule? Steve?
I don't know, there's anybody that's even close to my area that are doing any composting. I guess as far as I'm concerned, I'm a loner from everything that I do on my farm, whether it's no-till, because most people are recreational tillage, and all synthetic fertilizers and all chemicals. So when we start doing, no-till and putting compost on, and we're just a loner out there. So there's nothing even close.
Jay, I mean, you're both North Dakota, but south.
Yeah, it's that's one of the neat things is there's just not a whole lot of people that are doing it. I think there's interest in it. I mean, just what we're doing right now, there's definitely interest in it, but I think, it's taken a while for it to kind of catch on in these areas, I guess I would say. I think in those other areas, the government has kind of forced it a little bit in your bigger metropolitan areas, and so that's the reason they're doing it there. As far as out here, I think people just haven't had to do it, and so I think that's been part of it. But I think as time goes on here, I think you're going to see more of it because again, regulations are going to get tougher, in my opinion, than they are going to get weaker. And so they're going to look at, the management of putting manure on the fields. The compost is a lot easier to deal with than the manure is every year. And the waste side of it, just the runoff and all of that. So I think it's not that it's going to necessarily take off, but I think you'll start to see more and more of it as time goes on. So as far as I know, I don't know of anybody close to me I know there's some municipalities, Fargo does it. Most of those bigger cities, they have a composting program, but again, it's like I've talked about before, just because they say they're composting doesn't mean they're making necessarily a good product. So there's a lot of misinformation that goes into that. And I think that's one of the things that I like to talk about with people is, there's a difference between just taking your manure and calling it compost and actually completing the process, because it's a complex process, but it's also, it's a natural process too. So.
Great.
Yeah, we'd be the exception for our style of composting. There's a few Hutterite colonies that are to the west of us. They're doing a little bit of dabbling with how to deal with their poultry barn manure. But there's no one close to us. You have to get into northwest Iowa. And then again, like Jay says, a lot of that is basically they're just conditioning manure. They're not necessarily making compost. They're just getting manure manipulated to a point where it's a little easier to handle. So yeah, we're going to be the exception in our area.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes left, so we got time for a couple more questions here. So this next one's about area requirement. What is the area requirement necessary to compost the volume of beef manure, say, produced from a certain head count of cattle? Steve, we'll start with you again.
I would, I'm not even sure what I've got for area, but I'm thinking that if you had a 2-acre square and with a nice slope on it, you can do an awful lot of composting. I don't think you'd have a problem doing probably at least, like what we're doing, at least 1,500 to 2,000 ton in that area.
Jay, anything?
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, that's a good figure, I would say, for that 1 to 2,000 range. Now you can change that up a little bit based on the size of your machine. So I mentioned I have 2 machines. I've got a 6 feet high by 14 foot wide is my big machine, and then I've got a 10 foot wide by 5 foot high small machine. I can move through a lot more product on a smaller area with my bigger machine. the machine is more expensive, but you know, again, that's what you have to take into consideration. I've got it's about a 5-acre plot that I deal with, and I've got about what is it, about 6,000 tons of material that I have on that piece. Now, depending again on what your end product is you can cycle through that material pretty quickly. You might be able to get two turnovers of that if you're just planning to turn it, you know, 4, 5, 6 times. And so we've done that, but also if you're planning to hold that over, you need to find a way to either spread that at some point or find other ground. And so that again is something that you have to take into consideration. But one thing I will say, like Steve mentioned, before you start, you absolutely have to make sure that you have a sloped area, that you do your due diligence in making sure that it's level. You know, one of the problems that I have in this heavy ground is once I have any type of hole in my ground, that water just sits there, and then I basically have to have a 4-wheel drive tractor if I plan on turning my compost, which is ridiculous. But that's another one of those things that unless you've had to deal with it, that's, you know, something you'll have to think about. But I think a lot of this plays into, again, what you want to do with your product. If you're doing a static pile, let's say you have an excavator or a payloader, you hardly need any room at all because you're just going to move it from one spot to the next. So again, depending on what you want to do, with a turner, you're going to need a little more room. So
Great.
Yeah, our site is about 15 acres, but that's because the state made us have a catch basin. So that's about a third of that area because they want us to make sure that we contain any significant rain event that would strike that composting site. And then it's bermed, so it's isolated from the surrounding field as well. So yeah, it's kind of a big area, but we wanted to be able to store like a year's worth of material if we had to on the site at any one time, because our fields aren't going to be open until a certain point in the summer. So we just want to make sure we're probably oversized a little bit. We estimate our raw tons of material we'll handle in a year is about 30,000. So it's pretty large.
I see in the chat box here, Mary Wicks added a resource for calculating size of, or what size area you will need. And that's the composting handbook that we also have in our resources section on the webpage with all our videos. I know that the on-farm composting handbook, it's kind of an older reference, but it's still got a lot of good information in it. I've used it quite a bit for reference. Okay, specific question for Steve. How do you add clay?
I've got a clay hill in our yard area, so you basically estimate the amount of clay, and then you know once you get your pile mixed, you kind of just dribble it over the top. You kind of estimate the amount, and then you turn it into the pile. So.
Okay. Now, do you guys move your composting sites? And what happens to the soil nutrients under the pile, and talk about the base of the pile a little bit? Start with
Yes, you do. You need to move your pile. Like I said earlier, you continuously want to clean your ends of your turning. Otherwise, it's going to get spread way out. You clean the edges up, and then about every month or every so often you may flip those piles with a loader, and then or when you combine them, you usually combine them on a different pad or location. Move it over at least one width of a pile, so you're getting that stuff on the bottom up on top, so it's turned. So it's very important to get that flipped over, at least on a monthly basis.
Okay, Jay, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess what I've found this year is there's a couple things to this. I do move my sites. You know, I try to, based on where it's going to be spread, we've done that, and then the site that I have in a sandier area, I just move it from one side of the trees to the next, basically. Now, what I have found, and you know, I don't know if this was the exact question, but the next year after we take those piles out, it is hard to grow any cash crop underneath where you have those piles, especially beans. Beans do not like that excess moisture and nutrients that are there. So that's one thing that I've had to do. Is I think corn does a better job if you're planting into that spot that you had your compost pile. The corn can handle it a little better, and it does create some compaction too. So I've tried to find ground that is my least productive ground to do the composting. I think that's another important thing, is if you can find an area that you're not growing a commodity is probably the best way to do it. Now, one thing I will add with the two machines that I have, one of the downfalls of my Wildcat is for some reason it doesn't do as good a job of turning that material that's directly under the pile. And so if I go to move that pile, I do have a little bit of a spongy, mucky area underneath, and that's something that I'm trying to figure out. I think what I'm going to do this year is use that machine to do the majority of the composting, and then when the windrows get small enough, come with my other turner, and that does a better job of incorporating everything that's underneath that pile. And so that is a problem, though, is you do get kind of that mucky, sticky stuff that's underneath there, and you don't want to mix that in with your finished compost. So that is something to take into consideration. But I would say that if you can have a set area that is designated to be a composting area, you're way ahead. And you just plan that it's going to just be a composting area, because then you can keep it sloped, you can keep it level, and you're not, excuse me, you're not having to worry about crops not growing there the next year.
And that's what I've done. The site that I have has been continuously in compost. I've now tried to do any cropping on it.
Kurt, anything to add quickly before we wrap up here?
Other than, yeah, our site's dedicated to composting, obviously, and yeah, working with our consultants, we always will build windrows in pairs, and after a certain amount of time, you know, you've reduced your volume, so then they want you to move them together, because like Jay says, things start to get bad underneath, so to speak, where it starts to influence your windrow, and then you need to get those consolidated. The windrows kind of tell you when you need to do that, but it'll all stay on the same site.
Okay. Well, it is 3 o'clock. And I promised I wasn't going to keep you late. So this is a picture that Mary Keena sent while we were talking, and said that I could add it to the slide deck.
Dorothy.
Daughter and why she couldn't be here as a moderator today. This is Lucy. She's officially off her feeding tube.
Can't see her, but
So she's doing great. So we'll wrap it up there. If you guys have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. We've got all our information and social media here. We'd be happy to help you out. And with that, thank you for joining us today for this live discussion on manure composting. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Take care.